Well, everybody thinks very linear. In other words, I think people think if they see me with CDJs, that means it will always be CDJs. Last tour was all vinyl. The tour before that was Serato. The tour before that was DVJs. The tour before that was a combination of vinyl and CDJ. So every tour is different. But I mean, I like some aspects of it. I don't like other aspects of it. Obviously, I prefer vinyl. In some ways, I wish vinyl was still the only option because everybody had the same tools, and I think it was fun then. If that's what the tour is about, then yes. But this is one of those tours I do every 4 years or so, where it's like the big tour, where you do a lot of festivals, and I've tried to play vinyl at festivals. It's very difficult now. You're very quiet compared to whoever just came off. So it just totally depends. Well, we wanted to come up with something that we felt would be equal in terms of entertainment value for any other act that was going to be appearing on the same stage. So again, I'm playing Glastonbury, I'm playing festivals all over Europe and everywhere. And I want the show to stand up next to any rock band, or because I'm lucky in that I have the liberty to play outside of the DJ tent. I'm not stuck in the DJ tent. So to me, that's a responsibility to show people what a DJ show can be. Every record is different, obviously, and this was an album that I spent a lot of time working on, and I was trying to make the best songs that I could. And in the process of putting the songs in a certain order, I just felt that this was the best sequence for me. I listen to a lot of different types of music, and I wanted the album to reflect that. Well, I don't know. To me, I don't know that I would necessarily agree with introducing sounding like 1996 to me. In some ways, I always feel like I've tried to make music that isn't necessarily tied to a certain era or time frame. To me, 6 Days doesn't sound like 2002, but it's a song that could almost exist in many different eras, and I like to make music that works in that way, because I think it only really matters to people for 6 months, and there's a long period of time. What I was thinking about recently is that, people talk about how Guns N' Roses came along and it took out Van Halen, and Nirvana came along and it took out Guns N' Roses, but then later on the radio you hear all of them on the same, as all classic music. It doesn't matter what came first, or what took out what, or what came along and replaced what. So I think it's only a short time that people think about those things, and then it just really matters how good the music is. Yeah, well, that's one reason why I think people think that I'm out of step and out of touch, you know what I mean? Because I don't really care what other people are doing. I mean, obviously, I listen a lot to my peers and my contemporaries, but I don't want to sound like them. I can only sound like myself. I can be inspired by certain things people are doing, and I can try to apply them to the way that I make music, but I don't want to sound like this new trend or that new trend, or because if you imagine, I think my palette is like a little bit from here, a little bit from there, a little bit from there, and the longer you're adding to the palette, the less this new piece is going to influence the palette. Do you know what I mean? In other words, if you have 3 elements and you add one, that's a big influence. But if you have 50 elements and you add one, it's relatively small. So I think that's what the big difference is when you're 20 years old and when you're 40 years old. You have a bigger pool of ideas to draw from, and sometimes that means that it doesn't necessarily sound like the vanguard or the zeitgeist. But again, I'm not 20, I'm 40. So, I mean, I'm still learning about music, and I'm still trying to figure out what my sound is. And with every record, I'm exploring my own direction. Well, I think that there was the Bay Area has an interesting confluence of ethnic groups, and it also has an interesting confluence of musical ideas. I mean, if you think about the history of San Francisco music, there's always been a fusion. Sly and the Family Stone is a great example of the archetypal San Francisco fusion. You have soul and funk, but with horns and with you know, a rock drummer, and you have all these different interesting ideas coming out of that. And that's what I think the Bay Area represents. I mean, in the hip-hop scene, we got hip-hop from New York, we got hip-hop from LA, we got hip-hop from Miami, from all over the nation. We weren't just focused on our own sound, we were pulling from everywhere. And we got to be exposed to a lot of amazing DJs from LA, people like the KDAY Mixmasters, people like M-Walk, Jam and Gemini, and then you had the Miami-based DJs like Magic Mike and Mr. Mix. And you had, of course, the Bay Area scene, and people like Qbert and Shortcut and the ISP guys really fed into what was great about hip-hop DJing and scratching from all over the nation. And that's something that I think all of us have in common. I was always buying hip-hop records from all over, not just a lot of people who grew up in New York, they were only exposed to New York. And I think that that was understandable because New York was the home of it, but I think being outside of New York, we were able to also see what was happening in other regions of the nation. I mean, I think there's still a lot of good and still a lot of bad, but I think that the industry as a engine to push new ideas has stalled. So I don't think you're seeing a lot of new ideas within rap and hip hop. You're seeing a lot of, you know, to me, a lot of records that come out now sound like they could have been made 10 years ago. It's still drum machines, keyboards, and then I'm not really crazy about the more dancey, trancey, Ibiza sounding rap, personally, just because that's not where my head is at. But I still think there's some interesting ideas. There always will be. Yeah, you know, but what I see about the rave scene in the U.S. is that there's absolutely no hip hop touchstone at all. Their reference points are house and dubstep, and nothing else, and some trance. But the people who buy Black Eyed Peas records and those kind of dance rap records, they don't go to raves. It's more, like you say, middle America. And then there's a whole other scene which is very young, and it's very rave based, and I've seen firsthand there's no hip hop knowledge there whatsoever. A lot of the dubstep DJs and the people who make dubstep grew up to some extent on hip hop, or at least as one of their influences, but the audience, most of them don't listen to rap at all.